Greetings and salutations. Today we will be covering the curious case of number stations. Number stations are shortwave radio stations characterized by broadcasting some pattern of numbers and/or letters, formatted in a peculiar way that differentiates them from regular broadcasts. Number stations operate on shortwave radio transmitters that operate between 3,000 and 30,000 kilohertz, transmitting cryptic strings of coded messages. A few of these broadcast Morse code. Some emit various types of strings of noises, numbers, or music, along with things of that nature. Most of the stations that have been found to have certain schedules, times, or patterns that they follow, while some others seem like they have no discernible patterns to their broadcasts, being in essence unpredictable, while some don't even use high frequencies, rather operating on low frequency devices. Some sources claim the first known incident of a number station being recorded was during World War I, with said number station transmitting Morse code. Number stations quickly became more and more widespread during the Cold War, supposedly having been active since the second half of the 1950s. It must be noted that a number of number stations continue to broadcast to this day, while other number stations have either shut down, while others have had a change in who is broadcasting from them. The Czech and Swedish governments have at times both acknowledged the use of number stations for espionage in declassified documents and given solid statements in the exact purposes of their nation's use of them. An example of one well-known station is UVB-76. The radio signal that occupies 4,625 kilohertz has reportedly been broadcasting since the late 1970s, with its earliest known recording being dated back to 1982. Ever since being found by curious owners of shortwave radios, the broadcast has been widely reported on and noted for years. The buzzer stops and the Russian voice reads a mixture of numbers and letters, and names at times. One such broadcast is as follows. Yeah, UVB 76. Yeah, UVB 76. 180. 08. Bromel 74. 27. 99. 14. Boris. Roman. Olga. Mikhail. Anna. Larissa. 7. 4. 2, 7, 9, 9, 1, 4. However, even though the Iron Curtain fell and the end of Soviet Russia, UVV-76 continues to operate, and its broadcasts even started to increase. Since the fall of the Soviet Union, a voice message has become more and more commonplace in said station. While some individuals may claim that the voice is a recording that is played on loop, many listeners have noted that UVB-76 is not a pre-recorded loop due to the buzzer sound, which is noted to reportedly be operated manually. This, along with phone calls and conversations happening in the background while the buzzer sounds, give validity to the idea that the voice isn't pre-recorded and just looped, but rather slightly different every time. Online assessments of the signal have detailed a jump in bizarre broadcasts since 2010, being almost monthly. In these incidents, snippets of Swan Lake were played along with a female voice counting from 1 to 9, also a question mark being transmitted in Morse code. Lastly, a series of strange phone conversations could be overheard from the receiver. There is also EO3, also known as the Lincolnshire Poacher Number Station. This is one of the best known examples of a number station. Early reports show that EO3 had existed since the 1970s, potentially even earlier than that under a different setup. At the time, a Lincolnshire poacher used a male voice and a non-electronic style of music. The station transmitted from His Majesty's Government's Communications Centre in Galcott, near Buckinghamshire, in England. It is notable that this station was a victim of constant heavy jamming attempts by many other number stations. EO3 was also hosted by the BBC Radio 1 at one point in time, showing off recorded samples from the station which were played on air. Its first broadcast was believed to be from Belchy Park in the mid-1970s, but later it was found to have at one point in time been moved to RAF Akrotiki in Cyprus. However, this long-serving number station would end its broadcasting in 2008. Another well-known incident involving number stations occurred back in 2001 in the United States when they tried the Cuban Five: Heraldo Hernandez, Antonio Guerrero, Ramon Liviano, Fernando Gonzalez, and René González. They would be charged for spying on the behalf of Cuba. The group received decoded messages that had been sent from the Atención number station, which was broadcast out of Cuba. The Cornet Project, which is a group that has compiled recordings of number stations, along with the number stations themselves, that had been tied to World War I, has long believed that these stations are part of government agencies communicating with spies along with operatives, to the point of being willing to take legal action. The proponents of this idea say that the messages are encrypted with a one-time pad to avoid any risk of decryption by the enemy. It's been pointed out that number stations have been confirmed and acknowledged to espionage by Robert Wallace and H. Kenneth Melton in their text known as Spycraft. This type of one-way voice link has been described as a covert communication system that guarantees transmitting messages will not be unintentionally picked up by unmodified shortwave radios using high-frequency shortwave bands between 3 to 30 megahertz at predetermined dates, times, and frequencies unknown by the agent, yet accessible through a communications plan. The transmissions were contained in a series of repeated random number sequences and could only be deciphered through the agent's single-use pad. If proper tradecraft was practiced and instructions were precisely followed, an AWVL transmission can be seen as truly undecipherable, as long as the agent would be able to excuse the ownership of a shortwave radio, and as long as they did not bring heavy scrutiny onto themselves, which would come with increased surveillance, then the communication should be secure. Understanding how the number station messages work is actually not as complex as one would believe. The letters of the messages are converted into numbers, and they're added to numbers from the notepad using a simple mathematical operation known as false addition, the results of which then transmitted. Now the recipient of the message would use the one-use pad along with false subtraction to decipher the message itself. The reason number stations are so useful is due to high-frequency radio signals being able to be transmitted at a relatively low power and broadcast all around the world. In preferably ideal conditions, one would be able to be tuned into them with the use of the proper antenna and a good receiver. However, these same benefits can be a detriment. An incident that depicted this was when a BBC frequency, 7,325 kilohertz, had been used, which prompted an avid listener of the BBC in Andorra to reach out to the company. She wrote to the World Service Waveguide program in 1983, complaining that her listening had been interrupted by a female voice reading out numbers in English, and asked the announcer what the interference was. The BBC presenter laughed and suggested it could be related to some type of espionage. In October 1990, it was reported that number stations had been interfering with the communications on 6,577 kilohertz, a frequency that was commonly used by air traffic control in the Caribbean. This interference was such that at least one monitored transmission ended up blocking the entire communications channel. On September 27, 2006, another incident such as these occurred, in which an amateur radio transmission in the 30M band was affected by S06, also known as Russian Man number station. It's also known that North Korean Foreign Language Service Voice of Korea began broadcasting from EO3, formerly Lincolnshire Poachers frequency 1154.5 kHz in 2006. However, Lincolnshire's broadcasts have occurred on 3 different frequencies. The remaining 2 frequencies have not been tampered with. This has been linked to the system frequencies EO3A, also known as Cherry Ripe. Conversely, this ability to interfere with the broadcasts of others could be seen as a proper boon and or a tool of 4th generational warfare. It is noted that in a 1998 article in the Daily Telegraph, a spokesperson for the Department of Trade and Industry in the United Kingdom said as follows: "These number stations are what you suppose they are. People shouldn't be mystified by them. They are not for, shall we say, public consumption." From 1945 to 1956, the CIA and British Secret Intelligence Services dispatched agents to support anti-Soviet guerrillas in the Baltic states. This would be Belarus, Ukraine, that area. However, most of these agents were captured with their radio transmitters and code books. The KGB used these codes to force captured agents to signal back to their handlers in order to capture more assets. In 1988, The KGB showed off these codebooks and transmitters in TV in a program called The Game. There's also the incident when the FBI recruited a source inside the Communist Party of the United States who would go on to observe messages sent by the Soviets to the US Communists. The Bureau decided that these messages, with decoding instructions it had received from the spies, were enough for them to go in public and release files about this solo operation. In 1983, the KGB uncovered CIA agent Alexander Ogedrensky, a Soviet diplomat who was receiving tasks and commands from American numbers broadcasts. One of the more well-known recent incidents involves North Korea in 2016, who revived their numbers broadcast stations in a move which some analysts regard as an attempt at engaging in psychological warfare maneuvers. In 2017, 16 identifiable broadcasts, including timed transmissions, occurred in April of that year. Part of what has come out of enthusiasts investigating number stations are nicknames or identifiers that are commonly used for said observations of number stations. These are mainly used by said enthusiasts as a shorthand to identify them, rather than having to give their frequency, normally being based on a distinctive trait or identifier of said station or broadcast. One of the most obvious ones is the Lincolnshire Poacher, due to it being such a well-known number station, but others include the Russian Man. Atención, which is believed to have originated from Cuba, due to an error in Radio Havana, Cuba's showing the broadcast frequency itself. For at least 2 decades, a lot of work has been done primarily by 2 groups, Enigma 2000 and the Numbers and Oddities. Enigma has set designations for these stations based on the language of the digital format: E for English, S for Slavic, G for German, B for various. British historian Lewis Bush published a book called Shadows of the State about these stations and their possible locations. Also notable is the CONET project, a freely available compilation of posts about number station recordings. These individuals have done an incredibly comprehensive work and what is rather an impressive uncovering of the owners of many of these now defunct number stations which have been identified, collecting documentary evidence pinpointing the modern day owners of the stations and the technical observations which they have gathered by triangulation and other such methods. However, it must be noted that even while sometimes the sponsor of the station itself is not self-evident or as easily identifiable, due to not all Russian stations transmitting in Russian and not all American number stations transmitting in English, more often than not, signal triangulation will help identify the signal itself and the direction where it's coming from. If it's within the Russian border, it's likely Russian. If it's within the American border or sphere of influence, it's likely American, and so on and so forth. It should also be noted that militaries and other parts of the state apparatus use coded number broadcasts for purposes other than espionage. As an example, it is a well-known fact that the Russian buzzer is a type of signal used by the Russian military for internal broadcasts. One of the most well-known examples of a number station being intercepted is the Atención station of Cuba, becoming the world's first station to be publicly and officially accused of transmitting for spies and espionage purposes, and having legal action taken against it. It became the centerpiece of a well-known United States federal court case of espionage, following the arrest of the WASP network of Cuban spies in 1998. The U.S. prosecutors claimed and accused they were writing down numbers and codes from Atención. The FBI testified that they had entered a spy's apartment in 1995 and copied program along with messages that were tied to the Atención numbers code. They used this to decipher the Atención spy messages, which the prosecutors unveiled in court and the United States translated. This is a recap of what the United States presented. Point 1. Prioritize and continue to strengthen friendship with Joe and Dennis. Point 2. Under no circumstances should German nor Castor fly with BTTR or Airborne Group, Brothers to the Rescue. Point 3. Congratulate all female comrades for International Day of Women. Through the hard work of enthusiasts along with the compilation of information and intelligence about number stations, we have been able to better understand the scope or at least partly understand the scope of the number station and their usage. However, it should be noted that we still have a number of number stations completely unaccounted for, either purpose or location. That's not even to take account the code itself, whatever code is being used, if it actually even is a code, yet remains unaccounted for. However, we can continue to follow through on the information we have and the resources we have gathered and accumulated, and continue to investigate them through listening to the transmissions. If you have remained with me until the end, I thank you, and I do hope you stay tuned and subscribe for more content.